is the smallest, most insignificant part of speech in a language. Is that the most powerful? I think so. I'm Michael Shevack. Welcome to Godsearch. If you're alive, you're searching. You're searching for meaning. You're searching for mystery. And you're searching for the magnificence and the fullness of life. That's a beautiful thing. Some people call that God. You don't like the word God, that's all right too. But we're searching for an experience of greater unity, of greater truth, and of a beautiful coordination between our actions and the actions of others and the actions of the world seemingly, I said seemingly, outside of us. That kind of grace or hashgacha or providence that people describe when when they're having sort of God experiences. Yeah, that's what we're moving towards. You can call it anything you want, including the G word. I don't care. The experience is the same. Now, decades ago, there was a rabbi, nice guy. His name was David Cooper, and he wrote fairly popular book called God as a Verb. And its perspective was a Kabbalistic perspective, which for those who know or don't know, it's the Jewish mystical approach. And Kabbalah is a lot of fun. I mean, I have fun with it. But his idea was that take God out of the idea of being an austere object that you have trouble knowing what it is, and making God a verb as an action word. And this was very popular. It has very American. In fact, it's, introduce your actions and move your actions and see how your actions coordinate with life. And all of this kind of spiritist synchronicity, which is very common in the New Age communities, which are very inspired by similar teachings in Hindu and similar teachings in American transcendentalist teachings. And it was a very, very popular book. And something always bothered me. It always bothered me. The reason is that the minute you make God a verb as a part of speech, you got a problem. The problem is the subject and the object. In other words, it's not an action in and of itself. If there is such a thing as God, there is some kind of subject that introduces an action. And that action is introduced on a substrate, on an object. If you're dealing with God as the supreme being, as the being with beings all in there, Elohim, a singular name for God that includes all of the different aspects or little gods. Well, if you're doing that, then God's object is God's own self. So the subject is the object. And if you're dealing with a verb or some kind of process involved, then God has a process within God's self to act upon oneself as its own subject to itself as an object, in which case the whole idea of God being a verb alone didn't sit right with me because it was not complete enough. So I thought about that. And that's what rabbis oftentimes do. They come up with ideas and then they communicate it to other rabbis and it gets them thinking and scratching their head. You see, I did that automatically. Let me think about that. That's my own body reacting to thought. And bang, they come up with other ideas. So I was thinking about that and I realized one day, and it was out of the blue, that the issue between our common everyday view of life and our mysterious, magnificent, meaningful view of life is not about process. Because whether God is having motions within God's self that creates different universes, or different universes are having motions within itself that create us and our worlds, that's motion. And they're just motions with different scales. But the scales That's where there's problems. That's where quantum mechanics doesn't fit really well with general relativity. That's where Bohmian mechanics doesn't fit well with Bohr's kind of dogmatism around the Copenhagen interpretation. Scales are the problem, not process. Scales are the problem, not subjects or objects, because you can have different scales of subjects and objects, such as me talking to you, rather than being some dude up in heaven with a big long beard talking to you, or he could be talking to you through me, which makes me a prophet. Spell that PH, not FIT. So it occurred to me that the perfect part of speech that defines what God is not a verb. It's not a noun. It's not a verb. It's not a subjective case. It's not an objective case. It is a preposition. Those tiny little words that kind of spring off of some kind of motion, but they're very interesting. So let's take a look at prepositions. If you have I have a little list of prepositions here, so I don't forget them. They're so tiny, I would flick them off like a mosquito. By, B-Y. It is by God that all things happen. By is the instrumentality of all actions, which would be part of the nature of that which we might call God. Nature with a capital N. Divine nature, ultimate nature. Being itself, being of all beings. Okay. By. With God, all things become possible. Interesting. Now, with permits scale to operate, such as free will, with God, so that it is not just you operating according to your own order, but you're within. That's a great word. We'll come back to that one. That's a preposition, complex one. You're within an order that you have to work with, or with which you have to work. Another preposition. With is a very powerful thing. Okay. There is along, right? Along God, there are many dimensions. Along implies dimensionality. It implies scale. That's a fascinating thing. To say that within God, a scale, different dimensionality to God's being, so that there are, however measured, because it's certainly not going to be your average tape measure that you pick up in Home Depot. However, whatever the scale is, even if it's, vibratory strings, there isn't along. There is a sense of dimensionality to that preposition. And a compound preposition, along with. And you have to operate along with, meaning within the dimensions that is God's nature, or that is nature with a capital N, that is the ultimate nature or divine nature, which is God. Let's see. Two. Oh, the tiniest little two-letter preposition. Okay. Where what is the purpose, of life? You're going to God, or you're coming from God, to what is the end of human life? From whence does human life arise? After you have along and you've admitted some kind of dimensionality to God, you have to ask the question, especially if there is implied motion, where are we going? To where? In God. In is another one. So to where in God. If God is God's own subject and object and everything is some kind of dimension or scale or aspect of God, then we are only going to God in some dimension or scale, and we are rising from God in some dimension or scale, and we don't really know the origin of the whole thing. Okay. But the preposition to is exacting in proposing to us the question that to-ness, fromness, is actually part of the nature which is God. It's very exciting. The other thing that opens up here, the minute you open up dimensionality in its description, is, of course, time. And there's until. So you get a sense of, is there a limit to the dimensionality called time within God? Are there sublimits? I mean, are there dimensions in pockets where time runs a certain way, but then it ends in that particular way and maybe reshapes itself so that it takes over in a different way? Until is a very powerful word, that we continue to do what we do until whatever that until is. Out of that, you get amazing things in theology with eschatology and messianic times and what's that called, where everyone flies up to heaven? I forgot the name of that. The rapture and all that stuff. Until is an incredibly powerful word in visionary revelations and visionary inspirations of prophets and scriptures of all kind. It's all there. Um, unless, no, very, very dangerous preposition. It says that since you are existing with, along, to, from, by God, that there is an unless, there is a certain way of being, a nature, a personality, an order. That's my favorite word to describe this because it's emotionally neutral. An order, and there are certain things you can't do. Like I can't jump up and without neutralizing gravity because I will come down. So there are certain, you know, unless you neutralize gravity, you cannot fly away from the earth. I have to put little rockets or Hermes little wings on my ankles and fly. So unless implies law. It implies a certain lawfulness and a certain requirement of the nature of God, which to us would be our law, the environment and that being within God which we live that dictates terms so that we don't just create anything we can or anything we want, but we create what we can that is actually possible by virtue of the nature of God as we experience it on whatever scale we do. There is also, let me see if I can see this here. Oh, dimensionalities that are relative. And we see them on the earth in terms of position. Something can be above, something can be below. Well, anyone who is ever on any kind of God search will tell you that as you grow, there is a sense of what is above to which you are ascending, to which there again is another use of the word to, and there is a below, that which is less advanced that you previously were. So you get a sense of above and below. Those are very spatial analogies, more like as if your feet are on the earth and you're looking up to the sky. But again, you can say superior or inferior, not with moral meanings. We can just say one is lower than the other. One is higher or super, meaning beyond the other. Or we can say more advanced, less advanced, but there is a sense of process and stages that we can become aware of in that process with the prepositions above and below. Now, if I were to say what is my favorite preposition, well, I've already done this many times and I've done it on many God searchers. I like the compound preposition within, which I will tend to write as with hyphen in, because if I am within God, then it is within God by which I will act, which implies along, it implies to, it implies until, because the nature of God implies an until I am permitted not to. There's an order here. It implies a above. Within God implies a scale, and it implies a within, and it implies an above. It implies a below. All those things are possible with and in God. Curiously, I think with hyphen out is an incredibly false preposition. In other words, I don't personally, in my God searching over many, many decades, I don't believe without exists. I don't believe there is anything without God. I don't believe there is anything without the being or the substance or the nature or the reality or the existence, which is God. It's a primary existence. I do not believe in no thing. I don't believe in that there is a null. I don't believe there is absence. I only believe there is something, always, and there is never not something. Can I prove it? No, because if there was ever not something, it's very possible that I would be part of that non-something, and I couldn't possibly know that I was part of that not something. But if anything within that not something was aware of its own self as not something, it would have to be, as Plato discussed in one of the dialogues. I think it was Parmenides, it was, or Protagoras, and one of the other, the P's, one of the P dialogues. Um, you know, non-being would be a form of being. So I don't buy that without exists. I don't believe that anything or anyone or any creature or any universe, anything exists without. And because of that, and this is the exciting part, this belief of exclusive religionism, where some people connect to God and other people are without God, absolutely, categorically without God, mercilessly destroyed, mercilessly combined, assigned to hell with no retrieving, just absolute nullification. I don't believe it's true. Relatively speaking, there may be realms that can be experienced this way. We've already discussed, along with God implies dimensionality. So there could be relative hells. I mean, people live relative hells almost every single day of their lives. But without, meaning the exclusion of anything at all from God, including God's own ability to exclude God's own being, I think it's a falsity. Okay? I think it's a falsity. So it's one of those very odd um, prepositions that you got to be careful. Relatively, yes, I think there can be realms within God that touch upon God, but where there are certain dimensionalities that are separate from other dimensionalities. There are certain memories that are pockets of memories, and there are bigger pockets of memories, and there are separations between these realms, which is another way of saying along or along with that there are dimensionalities within God. So the preposition, these tiny little discarded little words, to me, describe the amazing mystery, the majesty, the meaning, the magnificence of this being, this substantialness, this realityness, this existenceness that people tend to call God. And it's a very problematic word, as we said in podcast number 1. Prepositions are delicious because prepositions don't get stuck in objects. They don't get stuck in subjects. The subjects are there, and the preposition tells you something about the nature of the subject and to where the subject is directing itself as its own object. The prepositions are kind of magnificently transitional within something in relationship to itself. And that's why I think they are the most powerful way to describe the divine existence, the divine majesty, and the mystery of all existence. It's that these little words, they describe it without describing it. And they don't make the mistake of making God a verb, which can make any action that we take implicitly for God. There's a nice preposition, for, intended for, or against, which is another preposition. So implicit in the preposition is a verb. Implicit in it is motion, is process, is object, is subject, but they all hearken to a kind of dimensionality which is necessary to speak to the human heart and human desires and where we want to go. By the way, would you please go to yourgodsearch.com and get on there and send me a letter and let's discuss this thing more. Because these are these little tiny helper. These are like little nurses, little Florence Nightingales, to come along and try to help people trying to conceptualize something which is very, very impossible to conceptualize. It's very, very difficult to conceptualize. So be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Notice, I'm speaking to you. You're the object, right? To yourself. It's the same relationship that God has with own God's self, and you can't do it without an exciting little 2-letter word like to. Prepositions are holy. As far as I am concerned, they are holy. So much confusion takes place because we make God, the minute we name God, anything. The minute we give it a name, we lose its dynamism. We lose the excitement of the dynamism. We lose the living nature of God. Above all, as you go on your God search, you're going to discover that there is a living nature to the life experience. Indeed, your body has impregnated the materia and the elements of the earth in some way that has caused them to become individually alive as different creatures of different species. The livingness is the mystery. The livingness is the majesty and the meaning. And it's all there, deeply embedded into the tiniest, most insignificant words that are not very fun, but you can't write a sentence without them. Isn't that interesting? You can't write a sentence without them. They are the gluons inside the quarks. They are the gluons within the quarks. They are the gluons, the glue that holds our thinking processes and our language-based thinking processes together. Anyway, this is Michael Shevack. Thank you so much, as always, for being here on Godsearch. Keep searching. Keep on keeping on searching. Uncover God, discover God, and recover from conceptual ways of thinking like God that impede you from growing and understanding more and thinking on deeper terms, because they become conceptual prisons. Conceptual prisons. If God is a verb, then God is always changing. Then, well, is there anything eternal about him or her or it or they? Let's not get trapped by words. Michael Shevack for Godsearch, Wednesday, sometime around 5:45 Eastern Daytime. God bless. See you soon. Bye-bye.